Alright, this is John Colo with OKRod.com to another exciting episode for you. In this episode, I'm going to show you guys my 10 reasons why you guys should buy some nuts in the shell instead of out of the shell. And also, we're going to be talking about cracking some nuts. No, not those kind of nuts. These kind of nuts. These nuts that are healthy for you to eat, right? On my whole food plant-based diet, focused around fruits and vegetables. Another food I eat quite often are nuts and seeds, which are powerhouses of nutrition. Now, I personally don't consider oil to be a powerhouse of nutrition. It is a powerhouse of fat because it's basically 100% fat with very little other nutrients in there, whereas nuts are a complete whole food source of fat, fiber, phytonutrients, vitamins, and minerals, phenols, and all kinds of other different properties, including the beneficial fiber that will feed your microbiome. So I like to include nuts on a regular basis. I eat nuts almost every day. Sometimes I don't eat these nuts. I might eat a different kind of fat, such as in a coconut or an avocado, or maybe on rare occasion I get to eat ackee fruit, which is a higher fat fruit. I encourage you guys to rotate and vary your diet. That is very important. As much as I love macadamia nuts, you don't just see me with a pile of macadamia nuts. I got Brazil nuts, I got walnuts, I got almonds, I got filberts, I got pecans, got different kinds of nuts. Every different kind of nut has a whole host of different beneficial nutrients, including antioxidants, even resveratrol, different kind of fibers, vitamins, and minerals that are good for us. And the nutrient you guys need the most are the one you're not getting because you don't eat those nuts. Oh, I don't like walnuts, or I never eat those, or I don't like macadamia nuts. I don't know how you not like macadamia nuts. They're amazing. So I want you guys really to eat a wide variety. Now, the other thing I will say is that I don't want you guys going hog wild on nuts. Maybe you're on a keto diet and then you probably want to eat a high volume of nuts. That being said, I'm on a more of a high carbohydrate diet with a smaller amount of nuts in my diet, although I do believe they are necessary and are a healthy part of a balanced diet. I know some camps out there into like ultra low fat, 10% or even lower, and no overt fats. My personal opinion is that I'm not a fan of those particular diets for me, or based on some of the research for health in general. My style diet, I like to get about 15 to 20% calories from fat max, and all foods will have some small levels of fat, especially good leafy greens. Will have fats in there, but I like to add a few fats. So how this works out to me in general is about every day I eat like a handful of shelled nuts or seeds, and maybe 2 if I'm feeling generous to myself that day. But generally, other than that, I eat mostly fruits and vegetables, and be sure to check my other videos on all the benefits of eating all the different fruits and vegetables. But down to the episode at hand today is why should you guys buy your nuts in the shell instead of out of the shell. We have some macadamia nuts that I actually just got from Hawaii, shipped to me. These are actually from Big Island, Hawaii, and actually these nuts are from Kauai. So the Kauai and the Big Island are going to duel. Who's going to win? Evidently not Kauai nuts in that time. But in general, I'm going to say the nuts in the shell are going to win over the shelled nuts. And you will learn why in this episode when I get into my 10 reasons starting now. First reason why you guys should buy your nuts in the shell instead of out of the shell is because it can save you money. Yes, nuts, if you price them in the shell, are often less expensive than the nuts out of the shell. For example, I think I got these nuts in the shell for like $2 to $3 a pound in Hawaii. I mean, I bought a boatload of them, literally, enough to fill a carry-on suitcase that I brought back in my luggage. Whereas these guys are running about $15. Sometimes Mac nuts could run $20 a pound. So it's considerably more expensive. That being said, it is true, the shell does add weight to the nut because you're not able to technically eat all this, but we'll be talking about that in a little bit. That being said, not all the nut is consumable, so that is not totally edible. So the proper calculation depends on the specific nut itself. In general, it's anywhere between 1.5 to 3 times is a multiplier. So for example, an easy multiplier is just by times 2. So like if the Mac nuts cost $5 a pound in the shell, and the shelled mac nuts cost $15 a pound. You know, that's a 3 times multiplier. And if the mac nuts are about a 2 times multiplier, then that means it's still cheaper to buy them in the shell. Plus, there's a lot of other benefits of buying them in the shell as well, as you guys will learn. But each nut is a bit different, but I'd like to say in general 2 to 3 times is probably like the sweet spot, or what most nuts average. So if you times the amount in shell by 2, that's approximately the price of the out of the shell. So you have to do the math. Is it going to, number one, save you money? But money is only one consideration that you should take into consideration before buying the shelled or the in-shelled, right? Another thing I like to say, and I like to do personally, is this time of year, we're January right now, and I got these nuts here at my local Smart and Final, but many stores such as Sprouts, Farmers Market, Smart and Final, even Winco Foods near me, you know, they always get the nuts in the shell in like around Thanksgiving and Christmas time, and they have displays of them in the produce section where they just sell bulk nuts. And normally, if it wasn't during times of COVID, it would be all truly bulk. This year, because of COVID, they started packaging the nuts, and then they'll sell them for like $5 a pound on average. Could be a little bit more, could be a little bit less. But then after Christmas, they mark them down to clear them out. So I got this whole bag, which is basically 2 pounds, which is almost a kilo of nuts, for $1.50. So, you know, my price is literally, you know, like less than $1 a pound for nuts in the shell. And the cool thing you'll learn, one of the tips, is that the nuts in the shell store longer than out of the shell. But nonetheless, stock up now. If you guys could check your local store. Some stores may still have those nuts on clearance, and you can stock up and definitely save some money if you're buying nuts for like $1 a pound, which is my normal cost for like the Brazil nuts and all these guys over here, my mac nuts. I definitely spend more on them. Second reason you should buy nuts in the shell is because the nuts in the shell are going to taste a lot better than nuts out of the shell. We got macadamia nuts here, and they're almost like little marbles. And look at this. There are no cracks, no holes in the shell. This is 100% sealed, so no oxygen has been able to penetrate this nut and get in there and oxidize the fats or lower some of the phytonutrients, vitamins, in the nuts. So we got my nut cracker here, and we're just going to go ahead and put it in here, and we're just going to carefully rack this back and crack out my macadamia nut. And look at this. We got a fresh nut coming right out. Right there. Look at that. And I'm going to eat it. Oh my God. Like, if I had to describe that, it's not like eating a fresh mac nut that's almost like a watered chestnut, because I've eaten them straight off the ground when they were dropped from the tree. This has a lot higher moisture content than these dried nuts. But yeah, the second reason is because in-shell nuts generally, but not always, taste better because they have not been exposed to oxygen and can be fresher for you guys. Much more flavorful, more watery, more water content potentially. It depends on the specific nut. Third reason you guys should buy your in-shell nuts is because, as proven by scientific studies, and all the studies that I'm referencing are down in the description below, links to the studies. But basically it is proven by science that if you buy in-shell nuts, you actually eat less of them. And this actually kind of more models nature, right? I mean, if you go to the local health food store, you could open up the bulk bin and just open up the little thing, and boom, all of a sudden you got a pound of nuts in your little plastic bag. Meanwhile, you know, I've climbed my brother's almond tree when he had one. I'd get down the fruits, I'd husk the fruit, I'd then crack the nuts, and then, you know, after hours I'd have like this many nuts in the bottom of the container. You know, nature, in my personal opinion, does not want us to eat nuts, because I mean, after all, the nuts are literally the seed of the tree, so that the tree could actually grow another tree and the tree could reproduce. And when we, you know, basically shell them in mass, we just literally take handfuls of this stuff and shove them in the mouth. And I've had several raw food friends that still do this to this day, eat nuts out of hand like this. And this is dangerous. I mean, if people start eating nuts out of hand, man, the nuts taste so good. They're rich in beneficial fats that are so good. And I mean, it just lights up our taste buds and makes us feel good, right? You're just going to eat more of them. And it's like, you keep shoveling them in because you could do it fast, right? When you got a nut, right, you got to take this nut and then you got to put it in here. You got to crack the nut. You got to go back up and maybe do it a couple different cracks to make sure you get a nice complete crack without fracturing the little kernel here. You get the kernel out, and then now I could pop one in it. I could eat it. If I want another one, I don't just dump in my hand and shell them in. I gotta crack one at a time, man. This will considerably slow you down. And that is a good thing because you will eat less nuts. You know, my goal is to actually, you know, not overeat the nuts and eat more fruits, and especially eat more vegetables and leafy greens more so than the nuts. So it is a good thing that you're getting slowed down. In addition, when you guys are opening your own nuts, you're going to use your muscles. I mean, it's not a big workout to open nuts. I got different kinds of nut crackers. Maybe I'll do another video on all the different nut crackers I own. But here's a nut cracker. You got to literally put nuts in between the cracker and, you know, crack it and like use your wrist strength to literally bust your nuts in half. And you're going to get some exercise. Plus now you got to think about, how am I going to crack this nut without the nut fragmenting into a million different pieces that have literally nut dust. So now you're using your brain, creating brain plasticity, getting a little bit of exercise. You're going to have some good nuts to eat too. Now another advanced tip I want to give you guys is I want you guys, as you're opening your nuts in the shell, is to leave a pile of the shells out. So every time that you eat them, so you will notably know how many you've eaten in that sitting. For example, this nut cracker has a nice little tray that as I crack a nut, I just leave all the shells here. This is my yesterday's nuts shells. And all the shells are just left in here, so as I'm eating them, I can see, oh my God, when my shells get pretty much full on this bottom, I mean, I've eaten too many by that point. I like to only fill maybe half of this little bottom tray with nut shells, and that tells me, John, you've eaten enough, you need to stop, you need to eat something else that's even more healthy than the nuts because you've gotten your fill of the nuts for today. Once again, science has shown that by seeing how many you've eaten already, you'll actually eat less. So this is quite amazing, and this is especially important if you are already overweight and trying to lose weight. You don't want to overeat on the nuts, and using this technique and by opening one at a time instead of shoveling it in the mouth, we'll do that. Fourth reason to buy nuts in the shell, as I did here, is because they store much longer. Literally, this is nature's packaging, and you know, the point of the shell is to preserve the seed inside so that it can later sprout and germinate and grow into a tree. I've seen many macadamia nuts sprout and grow into little macadamia nut trees. They're the cutest thing underneath macadamia nut trees in Hawaii. But when the food is in nature's packaging, it will store and preserve longer. So literally, you could buy nuts like, actually these Brazil nuts are from literally last year. I store them for about a year because I buy about as many nuts as I need, like at the end of the year when they're on clearance, to last me for the whole entire year. And even then, some nuts could last even beyond that. So in general, because it always depends on the specific nut. Some nuts, like almonds, while they do have a shell, the shell is kind of thinner, more permeable, and it's more prone to damage. Whereas some nuts, like macadamia nuts, have a really hard shell and are much less prone to, you know, penetration, literally, and going to store longer. Brazil nuts, also a fairly hard nut, stores a little bit longer than, say, a walnut, you know, that may have some cracks in like some of the little seams of the nut. You know, here's one that's actually damaged that actually already might be bad as well. But in general, the shelled nuts will store twice as long as the unshelled nuts. So for example, shelled nuts could store 6 months, whereas the same nuts in the shell could store 1 year. So this means less food spoilage for you. And if you want to increase the storage life of your nuts, keep them colder. Very important. You know, I like to store most of my nuts in like a cool cupboard, like the bottom shelf in the back where it's cool and dark, in a sealed container, like airtight. Even better if you pull the vacuum on it. So oxygen free, you know, cool, dark place. Better than that might be the fridge. I don't have room in my fridge for nuts because I have too many fruits and vegetables in there. And then make sure you have a moisture sealed container so that no moisture is getting in there, because moisture is bad for the nuts. And then actually even better than the fridge would be like a freezer where it's like, at like, freezing temperatures. And they've even done studies where they store nuts even below freezing, like minus 20 degrees, and they show that the nuts will even increase in storage the colder that it's stored. So store your nuts as the coldest as possible for the longest storage. Fifth reason why I like to buy the InShell nuts is because they have been processed less. My goal is to eat more back to nature. Literally, I grow a garden in my backyard where I just literally pick the stuff and sometimes shove it right in my mouth and eat it with minimal processing. The more processing that is done, the more nutrients go down and more problematic it can be. For example, some nuts such as Brazil nuts may be even shelled in the field after they're harvested and then shipped back. And so that will expose the nut to more different potential contaminants. In addition, like nuts like macadamia nuts, the nuts get stuck to the side of the shell, and in order for the shell to release, it generally is heat processed at a fairly hot temperature, so that they basically just heat it up, and then the moisture goes out of the nut, so then the nut will easily release when they're putting it through their automated processing equipment, so they can do that in mass scale. So I don't want my nuts to be heat processed or pasteurized or anything else any more than they need to be, and that's another reason to buy your nuts in the shell. Sixth reason to buy the nuts in the shell is because less contamination. Likewise, these nuts, nobody has ever touched the inside kernel of this nut aside from God or nature, whomever you believe it to be, or the inside or the macadamia nut itself until I crack it open and eat it. Nothing has touched this. It is contamination free, or virtually free, unless there's a hole in the nut that some kind of mold or something gets in there. And so this is very important, especially in this day and age. Say like this nut, I'm not saying it does because it doesn't, has E. coli contamination because maybe this was picked up from the ground and some kind of animals were like pooping on the nuts, and it has it on the outside of the shell. And then they put this through the equipment, through the machinery without properly sterilizing it first, and then basically the poop gets on some of the machinery that basically cracks open the nuts that then touch the kernels, right? Now that poop is on the machine that touched this kernel, and it ground it in there, and then all the nuts after that go through the machine have now touched that poop that contains the E. coli that then contaminates the whole batch. So there's higher levels of contamination issues. I met one girl once at the Vegetarian Summerfest, and she's like, she would only eat foods out of a package. If it was not packaged like fresh produce, she wouldn't eat it. But if it was in a package, plastic, she would feel comfortable eating because it's quote unquote safe. Well, I don't know about you, but I feel safest eating nature's packaged foods such as the nuts. Seventh reason to eat your nuts in the shell instead of out, because once again, you're getting more of a whole food. So I have some pistachios here, right? So pistachios, another one of my favorite nuts. I love all different kinds of nuts. These are from an organic farm in California. And these pistachios, we're going to go ahead and crack this open. You can just do it with your fingers, right? And we're going to get this nut out. And when we do, something really funny happens. You'll see you got the little green nut on the inside. And then most people, when you buy the shelled nuts, this is what you get. You get the green nut. But the issue is, you are missing, number one, you're missing the little outside hard shell, which is fine. We're going to compost that. But then the other thing you're missing is this skin right here. You guys see this nut skin? On some nuts, it's actually called the testa, such as on cashews. And half of this nut, it's still kind of stuck on. Here's part of the skin hanging out. But there is significant antioxidant content in these skins, as proven by science, right? There are more antioxidants actually in this little skin right here that doesn't look like much than actually in the nut itself. All right, I'm going to eat that. That's quite good. And eat the skin and all. Same thing. If I shell Brazil nuts, oftentimes when you buy Brazil nuts, they're kind of like more whitish color. You're not seeing the skin, or the skin's rubbed off or damaged. You're getting less skin antioxidants because of that. In addition, once the antioxidants are exposed to air, they can oxidize and be reduced in the content. So yet another reason, more antioxidants if you crack your own and eat as much as the skin of the nut as possible. 8th reason to eat your nuts in the shell is because it can have a lower mineral content. Now, not going to say this happens in all cases, but there's a study, once again, links are down below, that mentioned that if you eat Brazil nuts in the shell, you're going to get more selenium from this nut. And if you eat Brazil nuts out of the shell, right, it had 1/4 of the selenium that an in-shell nut does, right? So literally you'd have to eat 4 shelled Brazil nuts to get the selenium equivalent of 1 nut. Now, of course, I also know that selenium content also has to do with, is selenium in the soil where the exact Brazil nut was grown. So many Brazil nuts in some countries, they don't have selenium in the soil, so the selenium will not be in the Brazil nuts, but you often hear, eat Brazil nuts for selenium. That's not always true, depends on where they were grown, and also if you're getting shelled or unshelled. So to maximize your selenium content, make sure you get Brazil nuts from Brazil and in the shell for the highest selenium content. But yeah, more minerals in the shelled nuts, yet another reason to eat them in the shell. 9th reason to eat your nuts in the shell is because in the shells, and I have some walnut shells right here, and if I look really hard I could probably find some pecan shells, but also the walnuts and the pecans specifically in the shells, these and other shells actually, will have phenols and antioxidants in the shells itself. The shells are also antibacterial and can be even anti-parasitic, such as in black walnuts, and I think it's juglione in there. And so the shells also contain nutrients. Now, we often don't eat the shells, although some people have known to have been eating peanut shells, which are actually technically a legume and not a nut. But traditional cultures around the world have used things like walnut shells, even black walnut shells. They grind up black walnut shells and put it in supplements to deworm us or to get parasites out. Likewise, things like the walnuts and the pecan shells, and maybe other nuts as well, have been used traditionally as tea. So literally take all your nuts, fraction it up into like little pieces, break them all up, and basically boil them into a tea, and you're going to have actually kind of a bitter tea with extra antioxidants and polyphenols, and in the case of black walnuts, probably also going to be anti-parasitic according to traditional uses of foods, which I consider to be a medicine. Yet another reason to buy them in the shell, because if you bought them out of the shell, you would not be able to make your black walnut, or pecan tea with it to get additional nutrients from the shell itself. Yeah, the shell also can be antibacterial in many cases because, the shell is on the nut to protect the nut from the outside, protect the nut from bacteria, mold, and all these things. And that's why these properties are in the shell that we don't often eat. 10th reason why you guys should buy the nuts in the shell instead of out, because the shells have many uses. If you maybe crack this really nicely, you could get actually half a walnut shells, and you could use those in art projects. These, I just cracked open one of those pistachios. Pistachio nuts are like little half shells. It's going to be great for kids and artwork to like glue them on a different thing or paint these or something, or make little creatures out of them in artwork. In addition, shells like the walnut can basically be crushed up with a mortar and pestle into like a powder. You could use that powder for cleaning because it's a non-abrasive cleaning powder, literally like in olden days, to clean, stainless steel, to polish up glass and whatnot. In addition, when I go to Hawaii and they have like a macadamia nut farm, they'll shell all the macadamia nuts, and then they'll use all the shells as macadamia nut mulch, which is really nice because it actually you could put that on top of your soil. It'll keep the moisture in and also provide nutrients and encourage fungal growth because it is so high in carbon as it breaks down. So literally it is going to build the soil as well. In addition, like all my nut shells are composted to add a nice rich carbon source into my compost pile. It'd be best if I actually just ground these up into a smaller particle size for more compostability. Of course, they could also be ground up and put into worm bins as well, and or even turned into biochar. Another thing I like to do with these big fragments of shells is when I have a pot that has big holes in the bottom, I'll fill some of these nuts at the bottom of the pot before I put the soil in, so that the soil just doesn't blow out of those large holes. This kind of like acts as a filler, but also as this degrades over time, once again, it'll encourage bacterial growth and more importantly, fungal growth, as well as attract creatures that may find a home in the shell. All right, the 11th and finest bonus reason why I like buying nuts in the shell normally is because normally, if it wasn't for COVID, I find all my nuts in bulk, not packaged in anything, because literally, you know, the shell is nature's packaging. I want you guys to get back to eating foods with nature's packaging. Think about it. A banana doesn't need a wrapper. It doesn't need a candy bar wrapper. It doesn't need a piece of plastic over it. You peel the banana and inside reveals the fruit, right? Apples and oranges and all different other kinds of fruits have nature's packaging to protect the package literally on the inside of the fruit, or in this case, the nut, from the outside elements. All nature's packaging can be fully composted and gets returned to the earth, because in the Earth's view and Mother Earth's view, there is no waste. There's no such thing as waste. All these are easily compostable and will turn back into soil, feed the microbiome, and it's way better for the planet than creating all this extra plastic by buying all these packaged nuts packed in plastic, when we get nuts packed in nature's packaging, God's packaging, whoever you believe in the shell itself. Hopefully after watching this episode, these reasons will encourage you guys to go out and seek out some nuts in the shell. I have many videos that I've been an advocate of eating nuts in the shell for many years now. You know, I've gone to Hawaii and harvested raw macadamia nuts literally off the ground. I've gone and harvested and have videos on harvesting walnuts, and I was actually a little bit nutty in that video. I've harvested, you know, I've harvested pecans off the ground in Texas. I've harvested pine nuts in the mountains of Nevada off the pine, trees. I want you guys to eat more nuts. That is one of my many tips that I don't often talk about, you know, to keep my nut consumption down. My main way I like to eat nuts is with other high antioxidant foods, such as mixed in with a salad dressing. And I'll be the first to tell you, you know, that if you're making a dressing with nuts in it and you have to shell each one to put it in your dressing or into your recipe before you eat it, you're going to put as minimal nuts in there as you need to, because it's going to take so doggone long to open up each nut one by one to do it. So that'll encourage you definitely to eat less. I mean, when I have, you know, jars of nuts, I can just dump them all in, and I tend to actually overeat nuts a little bit. So I'm really, you know, aware of that. So that's why I like to buy the nuts in the shell. Plus also, to me, they taste better. And these nuts are actually, I literally went out into a field and met the farmer that delivered them to me. You know, and I bought a whole bunch so I could support the local farmer. But many places have nuts growing, and there's also even a lot more nuts in the shell that you may be able to find near you. You know, monkey pot nuts, and there's like hickory nuts and all different kinds of nuts, more than what is available in the store. There's so many other wild nuts if you know what you're looking for. And I would encourage you guys to learn about some of the wild nuts that may be available near you to eat, and make sure you have 110% identification before eating any wild nuts. But yeah, nuts in the shell are completely amazing. I want you guys to eat more of them, and I want you guys to support and find places that sell the nuts in the shell. Many times, if it's not during the holiday season, you may have to go online to find a specialty vendor that sells them. But I often encourage you guys to check your local farmers markets and check with local farms in your area to see, you know, what nuts are being grown locally, and support your local farmer. If not, have your own tree. I know pistachio nuts grow here in my city, as well as things like the pine nuts will easily grow here. Almonds will grow here as well. So, you know, put in an almond tree or other kind of nut tree and feed you and your family for the future. Last thing I want to say is that I want you guys, especially if you're eating things like almonds, you know, I want you guys to pay attention to some of the different essential fatty acids that are in the nuts, you know, the omega-3s and the omega-6s. You know, almonds are very, very, very high in omega-6s, and if you're only drinking almond milk all the time or eating nuts, eating almonds all the time, you're not going to have a proper ratio of omega-3 to 6s, and it can cause health challenges in the long run. That's why probably the best nut in terms of omega-3 to 6 balance are the walnuts, because they have a significantly more omega-3 to 6s, better balance than like the almonds do. You know, every time I eat almonds, which is really rare because I'm not a big fan of almonds, I always mix in some flax seeds with it to better balance out the omega-3 to 6 ratio, as it is so critical for your health and to have proper conversion of EPA and DHA in your body. So anyways, that's pretty much it for this episode. If you guys enjoyed this episode, hey, please be sure to give this video a thumbs up. Also be sure to share this video with somebody that's still buying nuts out of the shell so they can learn about the benefits of buying them in the shell. Hopefully this video has prompted you at least to go out and buy some nuts in the shell and start opening them yourself to have better taste, better nutrition, and actually even get some exercise and allow you to not eat them as much. Also be sure to click that subscribe button right down below so you never miss out on my new and upcoming episodes that come out every 5 to 7 days. You never know where I'll show up or what new information or health information I'll be showing you guys so that you guys can improve your health, eat more fresh fruits and vegetables and other plant foods so you can have the most awesome life ever. And make sure you click the little bell so you get notified as my new videos come out. And finally, be sure to check my past episodes. The past episodes are a wealth of knowledge. Over 500 episodes at this time on this YouTube channel dedicated to teach you guys how to eat more fresh fruits and vegetables. I'll put a couple links down below in the description for episodes I've had on harvesting my own nuts in the past. So with that, my name is John Kohler with OKRaw.com. We'll see you next time, and until then, don't get too nutty and eat your fruits and vegetables. They're always the best.